The police knocked on my door at 2:47 in the afternoon while I was wrist-deep in potting soil transplanting my heirloom tomatoes into larger containers. I heard the sharp rap of knuckles against wood, and assumed it was my neighbor Mrs. Chun returning the pruning shears she'd borrowed last week. When I opened the door with dirt-streaked hands and my old gardening apron still tied around my waist, I found two uniformed officers standing on my porch with expressions that made my stomach drop. "Ma'am, are you Vivian Cole?" the taller officer asked, his hand resting on his belt in that casual but ready stance that police officers always seem to have. "Yes, that's me." "Something wrong? Has something happened?" My mind immediately went to my son Marcus. Car accident, hospital. Something terrible that would explain why two police officers were at my door in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. "We received a wellness check request for this address." The female officer spoke now, her voice gentler, but with an edge of concern that made my chest tighten. "Your son called the station this morning. He reported that you were missing and that he hasn't been able to reach you for several days. He was worried about your safety. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." I stared at them in complete confusion. "Missing? I'm standing right here. I've been home all week. There must be some mistake." The male officer pulled out a small notepad. "Ma'am, when was the last time you spoke with your son, Marcus Cole?" "Yesterday morning. We talked for almost 20 minutes. He called to tell me about a new client at his architecture firm. I even texted him a photo of my garden around lunchtime." "Can I see your phone?" the female officer asked. And something in her tone made me realize this wasn't just a simple misunderstanding. This was serious. They thought something was genuinely wrong. I wiped my hands on my apron and retrieved my phone from the kitchen counter where I'd left it charging. When I opened my messages, my blood ran cold. The text I'd sent to Marcus yesterday, the photo of my flourishing tomato plants with the caption, "Look how beautiful they're coming along," showed as delivered but not read. In fact, looking at our entire conversation thread, none of my messages from the past 3 days showed as read and there were no responses from Marcus since Saturday. "My name is Vivian Cole and I'm 68 years old. 3 weeks ago I thought I understood my life. I was a retired elementary school teacher living in the home I had shared with my late husband Daniel for 42 years. My days were filled with my garden, my book club, my volunteer work at the community center, and regular calls with my son Marcus, who lived across town with his wife Simone. I was independent, healthy, and content. Today, standing in my doorway with two police officers looking at me with a mixture of concern and suspicion, I realized that everything I thought I knew was built on sand. The officers asked to come inside and I led them to my living room, acutely aware of how the house must look to outsiders. The morning dishes were still in the sink because I'd gotten absorbed in my gardening. There were seat catalogs spread across the coffee table, and my reading glasses perched on top of a half-finished crossword puzzle. A normal Tuesday in the life of a woman who lived alone and answered to no one but herself. "Ma'am, your son told us that he's been trying to reach you since Thursday. He said all his calls go straight to voicemail and you haven't responded to any of his texts or emails. He was concerned enough to drive by your house twice, but he said the doors were locked and you didn't answer when he knocked. He thought you might have fallen or had a medical emergency." Thursday, I replayed the week in my mind. Thursday, I'd been at the community center all morning helping organize donated books for their annual sale. I'd come home, made lunch, worked in the garden, then spent the evening reading on my back porch where the jasmine I planted 15 years ago filled the air with sweetness. Friday, I'd driven to the farmer's market downtown, then stopped by the library to return books and pick up my holds. Saturday morning, Marcus had called while I was having coffee, and we chatted about his upcoming presentation at work. Everything had been completely normal. I tried calling him back Saturday afternoon to ask if he wanted me to make my pot roast for Sunday dinner, but the call went straight to voicemail. I assumed he was busy with a work project. He gets like that sometimes. So focused on his designs that he forgets to check his phone for hours. "Officer, I can show you my call log. I've tried to reach Marcus. He's the one who hasn't been responding to me. The female officer, whose name tag read Martinez, took my phone and scrolled through my recent calls. Her expression shifted slightly as she examined the screen. "Mrs. Cole, can you tell me about your relationship with your daughter-in-law, Simone?" The question caught me off guard. What does Simone have to do with this? Just answer the question, please. We get along fine. She's been married to Marcus for 8 years. She works in pharmaceutical sales and travels quite a bit for her job. Why? Have either of them expressed concerns about your ability to live independently, about your memory or your health? I felt heat rise to my cheeks. Well, because there's nothing to be concerned about. I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. Drive. Cook. I manage my own finances. I volunteer regularly. I'm healthier now than some people 20 years younger. Officer Martinez handed my phone back to me. "Mrs. Cole, I'm going to be direct with you because I think you deserve honesty. Your son didn't just call asking for a wellness check. He filed a missing persons report. He told the dispatcher that you have early-stage dementia and that your cognitive decline has been accelerating. He said he's been your primary caregiver, but that you've become increasingly confused and combative. He claimed that you sometimes forget to eat or take your medications and that you've gotten lost driving several times in the past few months." The words hit me like physical blows, each sentence more absurd and hurtful than the last. That's not true. None of that is true. I don't have dementia. I've never been diagnosed with any cognitive issues. I don't take any medications except a daily vitamin and occasional ibuprofen for my arthritis. And I've never gotten lost driving. I've lived in this city for 45 years. The male officer, whose name tag read Thompson, was watching me carefully. "Mrs. Cole, can you tell me what day it is today?" "Tuesday, December 22nd. "What year?" 2024. "Who's the current president?" His questions felt insulting, like I was a child being tested on basic facts. But I answered each one calmly and correctly. I recited my address, my phone number, my social security number. I walked them through my activities for the past week, providing specific details that only someone with a clear memory could recall. I showed them my checkbook register where I balanced my accounts just yesterday. I pulled up my calendar where I'd noted upcoming appointments, including my book club meeting next Thursday and my volunteer shift at the community center on Friday. Officer Martinez seemed increasingly uncomfortable as I demonstrated my complete lucidity. "Mrs. Cole, I have to ask, is there any reason your son would lie about your condition? Have you had any disagreements recently? Any family conflicts?" I thought about it carefully. Marcus and I had always been close. After Daniel died 6 years ago from pancreatic cancer, Marcus had been my rock. He'd helped me navigate the legal paperwork, the insurance claims, the overwhelming loneliness of suddenly being alone after decades of partnership. He called regularly, visited often, and included me in his life in ways that made me feel valued rather than obligated. But things had changed about 8 months ago when Simone got her promotion. She started traveling more frequently for work, sometimes for a week or 2 at a time. Marcus seemed stressed, stretched thin between his demanding job and managing everything at home alone. I'd offered to help more, to cook meals he could freeze or do his grocery shopping, but Simone had politely declined, saying they had everything under control. Then about 3 months ago, Marcus started asking questions about my house, whether I'd ever consider downsizing, moving into something more manageable, maybe a nice condo where I wouldn't have to worry about yard maintenance or repairs. I brushed off the suggestions because I loved my home. Every room held memories of Daniel, of raising Marcus, of the life we'd built together. The garden was my sanctuary, something I'd cultivated over decades. The thought of leaving it felt like abandoning a part of myself. "We haven't had any major disagreements," I told the officers. "Though recently, my son has suggested I might want to consider moving to a smaller place. I've made it clear I'm happy where I am." The officers exchanged a look that I couldn't quite interpret. "Mrs. Cole, we're going to need to contact your son and clear up this situation. In the meantime, is there anyone else we can call? A friend or family member who can verify your well-being?" I gave them the names and numbers of 3 people. My best friend Patricia, who I'd known since our children were in kindergarten together. My former teaching colleague Helen, who I had lunch with every other week, and Father Michael from my church, where I attended services regularly and helped organize the community meal program. The officers made their calls while I sat in my living room feeling like a stranger in my own home. Each person confirmed the same thing. Yes, Vivian is sharp as ever. No, there's never been any sign of cognitive problems. Yes, she's completely independent and managing beautifully on her own. After 45 minutes, Officer Martinez sat down across from me with an expression of genuine concern. "Mrs. Cole, I'm going to level with you. Something doesn't add up here. You're clearly competent and well. Your friends in your church confirm that you're active and engaged, but your son filed an official missing persons report and made specific claims about your mental health that don't match reality. This suggests either a serious miscommunication or something more concerning. Do you have any explanation for why your son would say these things?" I didn't have an answer. The only thing I could think of was that maybe Simone had told him things that weren't true. Maybe she'd misinterpreted something or exaggerated normal senior moments into signs of dementia. Maybe Marcus was so stressed and overwhelmed that he'd convinced himself I was worse off than I actually was, projecting his own anxiety onto my situation. The officers left after making me promise to call if I felt unsafe. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Or if anything unusual happened, they said they'd follow up with Marcus and try to sort out the confusion. After they drove away, I stood in my quiet house trying to make sense of what had just occurred. My son, the person I loved most in the world, had told the police I was missing and mentally incompetent. Either he genuinely believed I was in trouble, which meant someone had been feeding him false information, or he was lying deliberately, which opened up possibilities I didn't want to consider. I tried calling Marcus again, but the call went straight to voicemail. I sent a text. "Honey, the police just came by. There's been some kind of misunderstanding. Please call me as soon as you get this. I'm worried about you." That evening I couldn't focus on anything. I kept checking my phone, willing it to ring with Marcus's number. I replayed our last conversation in my mind, searching for any sign that something was wrong, that he was struggling or that I'd missed some crucial detail. The call had been completely normal. He'd been excited about a sustainable housing project his firm had just landed. He'd asked about my garden and whether my tomatoes had recovered from the unexpected cold snap we'd had in early November. He'd sounded fine, happy even. Around 8 o'clock my phone finally rang, but it wasn't Marcus. It was Simone. "Vivian, we need to talk." Her voice was clipped professional, the tone she used when negotiating pharmaceutical contracts. "Course, dear. Is Marcus okay?" "The police said he filed a missing persons report." "What's going on?" "Marcus is fine. He's right here with me. We've been trying to reach you all week, Vivian. You haven't been answering your phone or responding to messages. We were genuinely concerned." "Simone, that's not true. I've been home all week. I've tried calling Marcus multiple times. My messages show as delivered, but he never responds." There was a pause. Then I heard muffled conversation in the background, like she covered the phone with her hand. When she came back on, her tone had shifted, become somehow harder. "Vivian, Marcus and I have been discussing your living situation. We think it's time to consider some changes." "What kind of changes?" "You're not getting any younger and this house is too much for one person to manage. We found a wonderful assisted living community called Meadowbrook Gardens. It has activities, medical staff on site, prepared meals. You'd have your own apartment, but with support services available whenever you need them." My hand tightened around the phone. "I don't need support services. I'm managing perfectly well on my own." Simone's sigh was audible. "Vivian, you're experiencing cognitive decline. We've noticed the signs for months now. The repeated questions, the confusion about dates and times, the way you sometimes forget conversations we've just had. It's nothing to be ashamed of, but it does mean you need more help than you're willing to admit." I felt like I was falling through space. Everything she was saying was a lie. Complete fabrication. "I don't have cognitive decline. I don't forget conversations. I manage my own schedule, my own finances, my own life without any problems whatsoever. Simone, why are you saying these things? This is exactly what we're talking about. The defensiveness, the denial. Vivian Marcus has been documenting the incidents. We have notes going back 6 months showing a clear pattern of deterioration. Your doctor agrees that assisted living would be the safest option at this point. My doctor, Dr. Ramirez, has never said anything remotely like that. When was the last time you actually saw him? I was there just 2 months ago for my annual checkup. He said, I'm in excellent health for my age. He literally used the word excellent. There was that pause again, that muffled background conversation. Then Simone's voice came back with steel underneath the professional courtesy. Vivian, we've already put a deposit down on an apartment at Meadowbrook Gardens. They have an opening. Available starting next month. We'll help you pack and get settled. You can bring personal items, photos, things that will make it feel like home. I'm not going anywhere. This is my home. The home I shared with Daniel for over 4 decades. I'm not leaving it because you've decided I need to be warehoused somewhere. Now you're being unreasonable, which frankly just proves our point. Vivian Marcus has power of attorney. We can make this decision with or without your cooperation, but we prefer to do this the easy way. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Power of attorney. Since when? Since 3 months ago. You signed the papers. Vivian. Don't you remember? We had them drawn up by Marcus's attorney friend. You, me, and Marcus all sat in the living room right where you're probably sitting now, and you signed them willingly. That never happened. I would remember signing legal documents. I would never sign away my autonomy without understanding exactly what I was agreeing to. And the gaslighting continued. This is the cognitive decline we're talking about. You don't remember signing the papers. You don't remember the conversations we've had about your increasing confusion. Vivian, this is exactly why you need professional care. You're losing track of reality, and it's dangerous for you to live alone. I hung up the phone with shaking hands. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a miscommunication. This was something calculated and deliberate. Simone was lying about my mental state, claiming I'd signed documents I had no memory of signing and using my son to validate her fabrications. But why? What possible reason could she have for wanting to force me into assisted living? I spent the next hour searching through my filing cabinet where I kept all my important documents. Birth certificate, marriage license, Daniel's death certificate, property deed, insurance policies, my will. Everything was exactly where it should be. But there were no power of attorney documents. Nothing granting Marcus legal authority over my health care or finances. If I'd signed something like that, I would have filed it carefully. I would remember. The next morning, I called Dr. Ramirez's office as soon as they opened. I explained the situation to his nurse, Linda, who I'd known for 15 years. Linda, this is Vivian Cole. I need to know if my son or daughter-in-law have contacted Dr. Ramirez about me recently. If they've discussed my cognitive health or requested any kind of documentation. Linda's voice dropped to a whisper. Mrs. Cole, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but yes, your daughter-in-law called last week. She wanted Dr. Ramirez to write a letter stating that you're experiencing dementia and recommending placement in a care facility. What did Dr. Ramirez say? He refused. He told her that you're one of his healthiest patients and that there's absolutely no medical evidence of cognitive decline. He was actually pretty angry about the request. He said if there were genuine concerns, they should bring you in for a formal evaluation rather than asking him to write false documentation. Relief and rage warred inside me. So there was nothing in my medical record suggesting dementia. Nothing at all. Your last checkup showed normal blood pressure, good cholesterol levels, excellent cognitive function on the basic screening questions he always asks. Dr. Ramirez even noted in his records that you're more mentally sharp than many of his patients decades younger. Mrs. Cole, is something going on that we should know about? I'm not sure yet, but thank you, Linda. Thank you for being honest with me. I spent the rest of Wednesday trying to piece together what was happening. If Simone was lying about my mental state and fabricating documents, there had to be a reason, some motivation behind the elaborate deception. I thought about money, but that didn't make sense. My finances were modest. The house was paid off and worth maybe $300,000 in the current market. I had Daniel's life insurance payout sitting in savings, about $150,000 that I'd been careful with, living off my teacher's pension and Social Security. It wasn't enough money to justify this level of manipulation. Unless it wasn't just about my money. I pulled out my copy of Daniel's will, reading through it carefully for the first time in years. Most of it was standard. Everything to me as his surviving spouse, then to Marcus upon my death. But there was one provision I'd forgotten about. A clause stating that if I were to be declared mentally incompetent, Marcus would become trustee of all assets during my lifetime. The money wouldn't just pass to him when I died. It would pass to him immediately if I was deemed unable to manage my own affairs. Thursday morning brought another unwelcome visitor. I was in my garden again, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of weeding and watering when a silver BMW pulled into my driveway. A woman in an expensive pantsuit emerged, carrying a leather portfolio. She looked to be in her mid-50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of confident smile that belonged to someone used to getting what they wanted. "Mrs. Cole, I'm Jennifer Hastings from Meadowbrook Gardens. Your daughter-in-law Simone asked me to stop by and give you some information about our facility." I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. "I'm not interested in moving to a care facility, Miss Hastings. There's been a misunderstanding." Her smile never wavered. "I completely understand these transitions can feel overwhelming. That's why I like to visit potential residents at home. Let them ask questions in a comfortable environment. May I come in?" Against my better judgment, I let her in. Maybe hearing directly from the facility would help me understand what Simone was planning. Jennifer Hastings settled onto my sofa and opened her portfolio to reveal glossy brochures showing smiling elderly people engaged in various activities, painting classes, garden clubs, movie nights. It all looked pleasant enough in a sterile institutional way. Meadowbrook Gardens is one of the premier assisted living communities in the state. She began. "We offer various levels of care from independent living to memory support. Based on what Simone has told me about your needs, I think our memory care wing would be the most appropriate placement." Memory care. The words felt like an accusation. I don't have memory problems. "Miss Hastings, I think my daughter-in-law has given you inaccurate information about my condition." Her expression shifted to something that was probably meant to be sympathetic, but came across as condescending. "Mrs. Cole, it's very common for individuals experiencing cognitive decline to lack awareness of their own symptoms. That's called anosognosia. It's actually one of the hallmarks of dementia. The fact that you don't recognize your own impairment is itself a symptom." I stared at her, recognizing the trap. If I insisted I was fine, that was proof I wasn't. If I admitted to any normal forgetfulness that everyone experiences, regardless of age, that would be used as evidence of decline. There was no way to win this argument. "How much does memory care cost at Meadowbrook Gardens?" Yes. The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Well, it varies depending on the level of services required, but generally between $8,000 and $12,000 per month." "And who would be paying for this?" "Your son Marcus has indicated that you have sufficient assets to cover the costs. In fact, he's already submitted the financial paperwork showing your savings and the equity in your home. He mentioned that you'd likely need to sell the house to fund your long-term care." Everything clicked into place with devastating clarity. $8,000 to $12,000 per month. That's $96,000 to $144,000 per year. My entire savings would be depleted in less than 2 years. Then they'd have to sell my house to continue paying for care I didn't need. And who would control those assets? Marcus as my power of attorney and trustee. Money that should have been his inheritance would instead flow into the coffers of Meadowbrook Gardens, while I sat in a memory care unit being medicated and managed like a problem to be solved. "Miss Hastings, I need you to leave now. I haven't authorized anyone to submit financial paperwork on my behalf, and I have no intention of moving to your facility. Her pleasant facade cracks slightly. Mrs. Cole, I understand this is difficult, but your family is trying to do what's best for you. The professionals agree that you need more support than you're currently receiving. What professionals? Name one medical professional who has evaluated me and determined I need memory care. She stood gathering her portfolio with practice deficiency. I can see you're not ready to have this conversation productively. I'll follow up with Simone and we can schedule another visit when you're feeling more cooperative. After she left, I sat in my quiet house and let myself feel the full weight of what was happening. My son and his wife were trying to have me declared incompetent so they could take control of my money and my life. They'd already laid groundwork with the police, attempted to get false documentation from my doctor, and contacted an assisted living facility. This wasn't a vague plan or a possibility. This was an active operation already in motion. I needed help. Real help from someone who understood elder law and could protect my rights. I called Patricia, my oldest friend, and explained everything. The police wellness check. Simone's claims about power of attorney. The visit from Meadowbrook Gardens. Patricia listened without interrupting, then said the words I needed to hear. Vivian, this is elder abuse, financial exploitation. You need an attorney immediately. She gave me the name of a lawyer who specialized in elder rights, a woman named Kathleen Morrison, who apparently had a reputation for being fierce and uncompromising. I called and was able to get an emergency appointment for Friday afternoon. That night I couldn't sleep. Every sound in the house made me jump. I kept thinking about the power of attorney documents Simone claimed I'd signed. What if she'd forged my signature? What if she presented them to a court and convinced a judge that I was incompetent? What if I ended up locked in a memory care facility, medicated into submission while my home was sold and my money disappeared? Around 2 o'clock in the morning, I got out of bed and went to my computer. I started documenting everything. Every phone call, every conversation, every detail I could remember. I wrote down the names of my friends who could attest to my mental competence. I made a list of my regular activities, the volunteer work, the book club, the community center. I gathered bank statements showing that I've been managing my finances independently without any errors or confusion. I pulled up emails I'd sent recently, articulating complex thoughts and making detailed plans. I was building my case, creating a paper trail that proved I was exactly who I knew myself to be, a competent, independent woman being targeted by people she should have been able to trust. Friday morning, Marcus finally called. Mom, his voice sounded strained, worried. Mom, what's going on? Police called me. They said you claimed I'd filed a false report. You did file a report. Honey, you told them I was missing and that I have dementia. I don't understand why you would say those things. There was a long pause. Mom, I was worried about you. You weren't answering your phone. I thought something had happened. Marcus, I've been trying to call you all week. You're the one who hasn't been responding. And what's this about power of attorney? About trying to move me into Meadowbrook Gardens. Simone thinks it would be good for you. You'd have people around, activities, support if you need it. You know, I don't need support. I'm healthy and independent. Why are you letting Simone convince you otherwise? His voice shifted, became defensive. She's just concerned about you, Mom. We both are. You're getting older and living alone in that big house. What if something happens and no one's there to help? What if I fall or have a medical emergency? You mean, Marcus, I could have an accident at any age. That doesn't mean I should give up my independence and move into a facility. And it definitely doesn't justify lying to the police about my mental state. I didn't lie. Simone said you've been having memory problems, that you forget conversations and get confused about dates. Your wife is lying to you, Marcus. I don't have memory problems. Ask Dr. Ramirez. Ask Patricia or Helen or anyone at my church. Ask the people I volunteer with. I'm completely competent and you know it. Another long pause then. Mom, I think you should come over for dinner tonight. We can talk about this in person, sort everything out. Every instinct I had screamed that this was a trap, but I also desperately wanted to see my son face to face, to look into his eyes and understand whether he was a willing participant in this scheme or a victim of Simone's manipulation. All right. What time? 6 o'clock. And Mom, I love you. We're just trying to do what's best for you. I hung up wondering if I just made a terrible mistake. I arrived at Marcus and Simone's house at exactly 6 o'clock, parking my well-maintained Honda Civic behind Marcus's Audi in their circular driveway. Their home was a modern two-story with clean lines and expensive landscaping that a professional service maintained weekly. It was beautiful in an impersonal way, like something from an architecture magazine rather than a place where people actually lived. I'd always preferred my own house with its worn wooden floors and overgrown garden spaces that held memories in every corner. Marcus opened the door before I could knock. He looked tired with dark circles under his eyes and a tension around his mouth that hadn't been there the last time I'd seen him 3 weeks ago at Sunday brunch. "Mom," he said, pulling me into a hug that felt desperate rather than welcoming. "I'm glad you came. We really need to talk." "Where's Simone?" I asked, stepping into the foyer with its cold marble tile and abstract art that I'd never understood. "She's in the kitchen finishing up dinner. Come on back." I followed him through the house, noting details I'd never paid much attention to before. Everything was expensive and perfectly coordinated. The furniture looked like it had never been sat on. There were no personal photos on display. No books left casually on tables. No signs that real people with messy lives inhabited this space. Felt like a showroom, beautiful but hollow. Simone was standing at the kitchen island plating what looked like salmon and roasted vegetables. She was dressed casually in designer jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. When she looked up and saw me, her smile was practiced and cold. "Vivian, so good of you to join us. Hope you're hungry." "I'm not particularly hungry, but I appreciate the invitation. I think we have some important things to discuss. Course, why don't we sit down and eat first? We can talk over dinner like civilized people." The way she emphasized civilized made it clear she thought I was being anything but. We sat at their formal dining table. Another space that felt more like a stage set than a place where people shared meals. Marcus served wine that I didn't drink. Suddenly paranoid about consuming anything they gave me. What if they tried to drug me? What if this entire dinner was designed to make me appear confused or incompetent in some way? The first few minutes passed in awkward silence punctuated by the scraping of forks against expensive china. Finally, Marcus cleared his throat. "Mom, I think there's been a big misunderstanding. When I called the police for the wellness check, I genuinely thought something was wrong. You weren't answering your phone and I was worried." "Marcus," I showed the officers my call log. "I've been trying to reach you. You're the one who stopped responding to my messages." He looked confused, glancing at Simone, who was cutting her salmon into precise, tiny pieces. "I don't understand. I've been calling you every day. Your voicemail box was full. I couldn't leave messages. My voicemail box has never been full. I delete messages regularly." "This is exactly what we're talking about," Simone interjected smoothly. "These small memory lapses that you don't even recognize as problems. Marcus has been calling you daily, Vivian. We have the phone records to prove it." "Then show me the phone records. I want to see exactly when these calls supposedly happened." Simone's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "This defensiveness is part of the problem. We're trying to have a reasonable conversation about your care needs, and you're treating us like adversaries. You are adversaries when you lie to the police about me, try to get my doctor to write false documentation, and send assisted living salespeople to my house without my permission. Kept my voice level but firm. You're attempting to take away my autonomy based on fabricated concerns about my mental health. That makes you adversaries by definition." Marcus set down his fork, looking genuinely distressed. "Mom, please. We're not trying to hurt you. We're worried about you living alone in that big house. What if something happens? What if you fall in the garden and no one finds you for hours or days?" I've had the same conversation with Patricia and Helen. We check on each other regularly. I have a medical alert system that I wear when I'm working in the garden. I have neighbors who would notice if something was wrong. I'm not isolated or helpless, Marcus. I'm just living my life the way I choose to live it. "But you're 68 years old," Simone said as if my age was itself evidence of incompetence. "You need to start thinking realistically about your limitations. I'm 68, not 98. I'm in excellent health according to every objective medical measure. The only limitation I have is the one you're trying to impose on me based on lies. Simone's expression hardened. They're not lies. Vivian Marcus has documented multiple instances of confusion and memory problems over the past 6 months. Would you like him to read them to you? Yes, I would actually. Let's hear these documented instances. Marcus looked uncomfortable but pulled out his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be notes. September 15th, you called me 3 times in one afternoon asking the same question about whether I was coming to Sunday dinner. I remember that day. I said immediately. You told me Sunday morning that you might have to work late on a project deadline. I called at noon to confirm you were still coming so I'd know how much food to prepare. Then I called again around 2 because you hadn't responded to my first call. Then I called at 4 to let you know dinner would be ready at 6. 3 calls, 3 different purposes. Not the same question repeated due to confusion. Marcus frowned, scrolling further. October 3rd. You got lost driving home from the grocery store and ended up on the wrong side of town. You called me panic saying you didn't know where you were. That's a complete misrepresentation of what happened. There was construction on my usual route home. They closed the main road and put up detour signs that were poorly marked. I ended up in an unfamiliar neighborhood and called you to ask for directions back to the main highway. I wasn't lost due to confusion. I was temporarily disoriented due to road closures, which could happen to anyone at any age. October 22nd, Marcus continued. His voice less certain now. You forgot that we'd made plans for lunch and weren't home when I came to pick you up. We didn't make plans for lunch. You mentioned possibly getting together that week, but we never confirmed a specific day or time. When you showed up unexpectedly, I was at the community center for my volunteer shift, exactly where I told you I'd be. Every Tuesday afternoon for the past 3 years. One by one, I dismantled the supposed evidence of my cognitive decline. Every incident Marcus described had a rational explanation that had nothing to do with dementia or confusion. They were normal human experiences, miscommunications, or outright distortions of what had actually happened. As I spoke, I watched Marcus' face change. Doubt crept into his expression. A growing uncertainty about the narrative he'd been fed. He kept glancing at Simone, who was gripping her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. Finally Marcus set down his phone. Mom, maybe we have been misinterpreting things. Maybe I've been so worried about losing you the way we lost Dad that I've been seeing problems where there aren't any. Don't let her manipulate you, Simone snapped. This is classic gaslighting behavior. She's rewriting history to make herself look competent when we both know the truth. What truth is that, Simone? I asked quietly. That I'm a healthy, independent woman who you're trying to force into a care facility so you can access my money. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Marcus looked shocked, but Simone's expression turned to pure fury. That's ridiculous. We don't need your money, Vivian. Marcus makes an excellent salary, and I'm a top performer in my division. Your finances are modest at best. Then why are you so determined to move me into Meadowbrook Gardens at $8,000 to $12,000 a month? Why did you already submit my financial paperwork without my knowledge or consent? Why did you claim Marcus has power of attorney when no such documents exist? I have the documents right here. Simone stood abruptly and left the room, returning moments later with a folder. She pulled out several pages and slapped them down on the table in front of me. Your signature right there on the power of attorney forms. Witnessed and notarized 3 months ago. I picked up the papers with shaking hands. There was indeed a signature that was supposed to be mine, but it was wrong. The letters were too cramped. The slant was off, and most tellingly, my signature had evolved over the decades to include a distinctive flourish on the final in Vivian that wasn't present in this version. This wasn't my signature. It was a forgery. And not even a particularly good one. This isn't my signature, I said clearly. I never signed these documents. Simone, you've committed fraud. Marcus, look at this. Look closely. You know your mother's signature. Does this look right to you? Marcus took the papers from me, studying them carefully. He pulled out his wallet and extracted an old birthday card I'd sent him years ago, comparing the signature on the card to the signature on the legal documents. His face went pale. "This isn't the same," he said quietly. Signature looks different. She's gotten older. Her hands aren't as steady," Simone said quickly. "Signatures change over time. That's completely normal." "No," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger. "No, this is wrong. This doesn't look like Mom's handwriting at all. The V is wrong. Then is wrong. Even the way she dots, that is different." His eyes met mine across the table. And I saw the moment he understood. The moment he realized his wife had been lying to him systematically and deliberately. "Simone, what have you done?" Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper, but there was an edge to it I'd never heard before. "What have you done?" "I haven't done anything except try to protect your interests. Your mother is sitting on $300,000 in home equity and another $150,000 in savings. Money that should eventually come to you, but instead will be eaten up by medical costs and end-of-life care if we don't act now. By moving her into assisted living while she's still relatively healthy, we can control the spend down. We can make sure that money doesn't disappear into some nursing home that will bleed her dry." There it was. The truth laid bare without any pretense of concern for my welfare. Simone wasn't worried about my health or safety. She was worried about protecting what she saw as Marcus' inheritance as her money by warehousing me in the cheapest acceptable facility and managing my assets until there was nothing left to manage. "You were going to have me declared incompetent so you could control my money while I'm still alive." I said, the full scope of her plan becoming clear. "You'd be my trustee making all financial decisions, paying for my care with my own assets while you and Marcus benefit from the rest. That's financial elder abuse, Simone. That's a crime." "It's financial planning," Simone shot back. "It's making sure your son gets what he's entitled to instead of watching your assets disappear." "Marcus, tell her. Tell her we deserve this after everything we've done for her. Everything you've done for me." I raised my voice for the first time. "You've lied to the police, forged legal documents, tried to get my doctor to write false medical reports, and attempted to convince my own son that I'm mentally incompetent. Those aren't the actions of someone who cares about my welfare. Those are the actions of someone who sees me as an obstacle between them and money they think they deserve." Marcus stood up from the table, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need some air. I can't believe this is happening." He walked out through the sliding glass door to their back patio, leaving Simone and me alone in the dining room. She stared at me with undisguised hatred. "You've always been in the way," she said quietly. "Always inserting yourself into our lives. Always making Marcus feel guilty if he doesn't call you enough or visit enough. Do you know how exhausting it is being married to someone who puts his mother before his wife? I've never asked Marcus to put me first. I've always encouraged him to prioritize his marriage and his own happiness. That's a lie. You guilt-trip him constantly with your loneliness and your widow act. Poor Vivian all alone in that big house with nobody to take care of her. It's pathetic and it's manipulative, and I'm done with it." I stood up, gathering my purse. "I'm going to leave now before this gets any worse. Marcus deserves to know the truth about what you've done, and he deserves the chance to decide how he wants to handle this. But I want you to know that I'm taking steps to protect myself legally. I've already consulted with an attorney who specializes in elder abuse. What you've done is criminal, Simone, and there will be consequences." Simone laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "Go ahead and hire your lawyer. You're a 68-year-old woman living on a teacher's pension. How long do you think you can afford legal fees? How long before your money runs out and you have no choice but to accept help?" "Longer than you think," I said. "And in the meantime, I have something you don't have. I have the truth on my side. And I have people who know me well enough to recognize your lies for what they are." I walked out through the living room, finding Marcus still standing on the patio with his back to the house. I knocked on the glass and he turned, his face drawn and miserable. "I'm going home, honey," called through the door. "When you're ready to talk, really talk without Simone feeding you lies. Call me. I'll be waiting." The drive home felt longer than usual. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel as adrenaline drained from my system, leaving me exhausted and heartsick. This was my son, the baby I'd rocked to sleep and nursed through childhood illnesses and cheered for at baseball games and moved into college dorms. The thought that he'd been willing to betray me, even if he'd been manipulated into it, cut deeper than anything Simone had done. But there was a small flicker of hope too. When Marcus had compared those signatures, when he'd seen the evidence of his wife's deception with his own eyes, something had shifted. The doubt had crept in. He was starting to question the narrative he'd been sold. Whether that would be enough to counteract Simone's influence remained to be seen, but it was a start. When I got home, I found a note taped to my front door. It was from my neighbor, Mrs. Chun, written in her careful handwriting. "Vivian, a man came by this afternoon asking questions about you, said he was from County Adult Protective Services. He wanted to know if I'd noticed any concerning behavior, any signs you weren't taking care of yourself properly." I told him, "You're the most capable person I know," and sent him on his way. But I thought, you should know someone is checking up on you. Call me if you need anything. I stood on my porch reading the note 3 times, feeling ice spread through my chest. Adult Protective Services. Simone was escalating. She wasn't content to work behind the scenes anymore. She was actively trying to get official agencies involved to build a case that I was a vulnerable adult in need of intervention. I went inside and immediately called Kathleen Morrison, the elder law attorney Patricia had recommended. I'd spoken to her briefly to set up an appointment, but now I needed help urgently. "Miss Morrison, this is Vivian Cole. We spoke yesterday about my situation. I need to move up that appointment. Things are escalating rapidly." The attorney's voice was calm and professional. "Tell me what's happened." I walked her through everything. The police wellness check, the forged power of attorney documents, tonight's dinner confrontation with Simone, and now the visit from Adult Protective Services. Ms. Morrison listened without interrupting, then said, "Mrs. Cole, we need to act immediately to protect your rights and your assets. Can you come to my office first thing Monday morning? We're going to file for a restraining order against your daughter-in-law, and we're going to notify the authorities that fraudulent documents have been created in your name." "What about Marcus?" asked my son. "He's been manipulated by his wife, but I don't think he's actively trying to hurt me. Do you want him included in the restraining order?" I hesitated. The thought of taking legal action against my own son felt like admitting defeat. Like acknowledging that our relationship was broken beyond repair. "No," I said finally. "Not yet. I think there's still a chance he'll do the right thing once he understands what's really happening." "All right, we'll focus on Simone for now. But Mrs. Cole, I need you to do something this weekend. I need you to document everything. Write down every interaction, every phone call, every instance where you've demonstrated your competence and independence. Gather financial records, medical records, anything that proves you're managing your life successfully. We're going to build an airtight case that you're being targeted for financial exploitation." I spent the entire weekend doing exactly that. I created a detailed timeline of events starting from 3 months ago when Marcus first mentioned downsizing. I printed out emails showing complex planning and clear thinking. I gathered bank statements demonstrating responsible financial management. I collected photos from my volunteer work at the community center showing me engaged and active in my community. Patricia came over Saturday afternoon to help, bringing Helen with her. The 3 of us sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd done homework with Marcus 30 years ago, and built what Patricia called an overwhelming case for Vivian's competence. "She's trying to steal your life," Helen said bluntly while organizing my financial documents into neat folders. "This Simone woman looked at your assets and saw dollar signs. She's counting on you being too scared or too confused to fight back, but I'm not confused and I'm not going to back down." I said, "This is my life, my home, my future. I'm not going to let anyone take that away from me." On Sunday morning, Marcus called. His voice sounded hollow, exhausted. "Mom, can I come over? I need to talk to you alone." "Course, honey. I'm home all day." He arrived an hour later, driving his Audi, but looking nothing like the successful architect I was used to seeing. He looked like he hadn't slept, his clothes wrinkled and his eyes red-rimmed. We sat in my living room, the space where he'd grown up, where he'd opened Christmas presents and brought dates to meet his parents and told us he was getting married. I've been up all night thinking. He began going through everything in my mind, trying to figure out how I got here, how I let things get so twisted. I stayed quiet, letting him find his words. Simone showed me more documents after you left. Financial projections showing how quickly your money would disappear if you ever needed long-term care. Plans for selling your house and moving you into Meadowbrook Gardens. She'd been working on this for months, Mom. And I went along with it because she made it sound reasonable, like we were being responsible and planning ahead. Did you know she forged the power of attorney documents? Asked gently. He shook his head. No, I swear to you, I thought you'd signed them. She told me you'd done it one afternoon when I was at work, that she'd taken you to her attorney friend to get everything notarized properly. She showed me documents with your signature, and I had no reason to doubt her. But last night after you left, I looked at those papers again really carefully. I compared them to old birthday cards and letters you've sent me over the years. His voice broke. That's not your signature, Mom. I know it's not. Which means my wife forged legal documents and lied to me about it for months. I reached over and took his hand. Marcus, I know this is painful. Finding out someone you love has deceived you is one of the worst feelings in the world. But I need you to understand something. What Simone has done isn't just unethical, it's criminal. She's committed fraud and attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person. There are serious legal consequences for these actions. I know, he whispered. I confronted her last night. She tried to justify it at first, said she was just protecting our future. But when I kept pushing, she got angry. She said things about you that were cruel and hateful. She said you were a burden and that I was weak for caring so much about what happened to you. She said if I didn't support her plan, she'd divorce me and make sure I got nothing. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw the broken man he'd become. The vibrant, confident boy who tackled life with enthusiasm and joy had been ground down by years of living with someone who valued money over people, who saw relationships as transactions to be managed rather than bonds to be cherished. What are you going to do? He asked. He met my eyes and I saw steel there that reminded me of his father. I'm going to do the right thing. I'm going to give you every document Simone created, every email. She sent every piece of evidence that shows what she was planning. I'm going to cooperate fully with your attorney and I'm going to file for divorce. Marcus, I don't want to be the reason your marriage ends. It's not your fault, Mom. I've been seeing signs for years that something wasn't right, but I kept making excuses. Kept telling myself that she was stressed from work or that I wasn't understanding her perspective. But this, he gestured helplessly, forging documents to steal from my mother. That's not something I can come back from. That's not someone I can stay married to. We spent the next 3 hours going through everything. Marcus had brought his laptop and showed me emails between Simone and the Meadowbrook Gardens administrator discussing room availability and payment plans. He showed me text messages where Simone had coordinated with her attorney friend about creating the power of attorney documents. He showed me notes she'd kept about my supposed cognitive problems, descriptions of incidents that were either distorted or completely fabricated. The most damning evidence was a recorded phone conversation Simone had saved apparently as insurance. In it, she was talking to someone Marcus didn't know who, laying out her entire plan. We just need to establish a pattern of incompetence. Simone's voice said clearly. A few well-placed calls to Adult Protective Services, some documentation from Marcus about concerning behavior, maybe a complaint to the police about her wandering confused. Once we have enough on record, we can petition for conservatorship. Then Marcus becomes legal guardian and trustee and we can manage the assets properly. The house alone is worth $300,000. If we sell it and move her into a basic Medicaid facility, we can pocket most of that immediately. We just have to be patient and build the case carefully. Listening to my daughter-in-law calmly plotting to institutionalize me and steal my life savings made me physically ill. I had to pause the recording twice to compose myself. Who was she talking to? Asked Marcus. I don't know. I found this file on her laptop last night when I was looking for the forged documents. She'd saved it in a folder labeled Financial Planning along with spreadsheets showing projections for your assets and care costs. The spreadsheets laid everything out with brutal efficiency. Column A showed the costs of memory care at Meadowbrook Gardens. Column B showed the costs of a basic Medicaid facility. Column C showed the difference. Money that Simone apparently planned to redirect to herself and Marcus. She'd even calculated the timeline for depleting my savings and selling my house, projecting that they could have access to most of my assets within 18 months of getting conservatorship. "Marcus, I need you to give all of this to my attorney," I said. "This is evidence of conspiracy to commit financial elder abuse and fraud. This could send Simone to prison." "Good," he said flatly. "She deserves it. What she was planning to do to you is monstrous." We sat in silence for a few minutes, both processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. Finally, Marcus spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I should have questioned things sooner. I should have trusted you over her. I should have protected you instead of becoming part of the threat. You were being manipulated by someone you loved and trusted," I said gently. "That doesn't make you a bad son. Makes you human. But honey, you need to protect yourself now, too. If Simone realizes you've turned against her, she might try to destroy evidence or create new problems. You need to be careful." "I've already moved out," he said. "I'm staying at a hotel until I can find an apartment. I took everything I need from the house and I've already contacted a divorce attorney. Simone knows I'm done and she's furious. She's been calling and texting non-stop, alternating between apologizing and threatening me." That night after Marcus left, I sat in my garden as the sun set, surrounded by the plants I'd nurtured for decades. My heirloom tomatoes were thriving, their fruit heavy on the vines. The roses Daniel had planted for our anniversary were preparing for their summer bloom. Everything here was alive and growing, proof that I was capable of caring for living things, including myself. But I also knew the fight wasn't over. Simone wouldn't give up just because Marcus had turned against her. She'd invested too much time and planning into her scheme. She'd probably escalate, try to do as much damage as possible before the legal system could stop her. Monday morning arrived with a phone call that confirmed my fears. "Mrs. Cole, this is Detective Sarah Brennan with the County Sheriff's Office. I'm calling about a report we received alleging financial exploitation and document fraud. We'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience." Relief flooded through me. Finally, someone in authority was taking this seriously. "Yes, Detective. I have substantial evidence to provide. When can we meet?" "How about this afternoon? 2 o'clock at the station. I'll be there." I called Kathleen Morrison immediately to let her know about the police contact. She cautioned me to bring her with me to any interviews, that I shouldn't speak to law enforcement without legal representation present. We met at the police station at 1:45, giving us time to review strategy before meeting with Detective Brennan. The detective was a woman in her early 40s with intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that put me at ease immediately. She listened intently as I walked through the entire situation, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting me tell the story in my own words. Marcus arrived halfway through, having been called by the detective separately. He provided the laptop with all of Simone's files, the forged documents, and his own testimony about how he'd been deceived. Detective Brennan examined everything carefully, her expression growing grimmer as she reviewed the evidence. "Mrs. Cole," she said finally, "this is one of the most calculated cases of attempted elder financial abuse I've encountered. Your daughter-in-law created an elaborate scheme to have you declared incompetent so she could access your assets based on what you've shown me. I'm going to recommend immediate criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and attempted financial exploitation of an elderly person." "What happens now?" "Yes. We'll issue an arrest warrant for Simone Cole. Given the evidence, I expect she'll be taken into custody within 24 hours. She'll be charged, arraigned, and will request significant bail given the severity of the charges and the potential flight risk. In the meantime, I'm going to put a flag on all your financial accounts and property records to prevent any unauthorized transactions. Ms. Morrison will help you file protective orders to keep her away from you and your property." The next morning, I was in my garden when I heard the commotion. Multiple police vehicles pulled up to a house down the street, Marcus and Simone's house, and I watched from my yard as officers approached the door. Through my neighbor's hedge, I could see Simone being let out in handcuffs, her face contorted with rage. She was screaming something I couldn't quite make out, struggling against the officers, holding her arms. Mrs. Chun appeared at my fence, her eyes wide. "Vivian, is that your daughter-in-law?" "Yes," I said quietly. "She tried to have me declared incompetent so she could steal my money in my home." The police finally caught up with her. Mrs. Chun shook her head in disgust. "I always thought there was something cold about that woman. Too polished, too perfect. Nobody who tries that hard to look good on the outside is usually good on the inside." As the police cars drove away with Simone in the back of one of them, I felt a complicated mix of emotions. Relief that the immediate threat was over. Sadness for Marcus, who was losing his wife, even if she'd never really been the partner he deserved, and a deep bone-weary exhaustion from fighting a battle I'd never asked to fight. But underneath all of that was something else. A growing sense that this wasn't quite finished, that there were still pieces of the puzzle I hadn't uncovered yet. That feeling proved prophetic when Detective Brennan called me that afternoon with unexpected news. "Mrs. Pohl, we've been going through Simone's financial records and communications as part of the investigation. We found something you need to know about. She wasn't working alone." "What do you mean?" "Simone had a partner in this scheme, someone who was helping her plan the details and who stood to benefit financially from the outcome. We're still piecing together the full extent of the conspiracy, but we've identified at least one other person involved." "Ooh," I asked, though part of me dreaded the answer. "The attorney who notarized the forged power of attorney documents, a woman named Jennifer Carroll. She's not just Simone's friend, she's her sister, and she specializes in elder law. She would have known exactly how to structure this scheme to avoid detection for as long as possible." The revelation sent chills through me. This wasn't just Simone's desperate plan. This was a calculated conspiracy involving someone with legal expertise who knew how to manipulate the system. How deep did this go? How many other elderly people had been targeted by this pair? Detective Brennan seemed to read my thoughts. "We're investigating whether there are other victims. Jennifer Carroll has handled a suspicious number of conservatorship cases in the past 3 years. Cases where elderly individuals were declared incompetent, and their assets were placed under the control of family members who then made questionable financial decisions. We're reviewing all of them now." Over the next few days, the scope of what Simone and Jennifer had been doing became clear. They'd run this scheme at least 4 times before, targeting elderly people with modest assets and adult children who could be manipulated or who were willing participants. In each case, Jennifer had provided the legal framework, and Simone had handled the practical details of isolating the victims and building false cases for incompetence. The whole thing had worked because they'd been smart about their targets. They chose people who were widowed or divorced, who didn't have large extended families to question what was happening, who had enough money to make it worthwhile, but not so much that professional financial managers were involved. People like me, vulnerable in ways we didn't even recognize until it was too late. Except in my case, it hadn't been too late. I'd fought. I documented everything and sought help and refused to be gaslit into doubting my own reality. And because I'd fought back, we'd uncovered a conspiracy that had been successfully operating for years. Detective Brennan kept me updated as the investigation expanded. Jennifer Carroll was arrested 3 days after Simone. 2 of the other families who'd been victimized came forward with their own stories. Adult Protective Services began reviewing dozens of cases that Jennifer had been involved with, looking for patterns of abuse. Marcus came by one evening looking more settled than he had in weeks. He'd found an apartment, filed divorce papers, and started therapy to process everything he'd been through. "Mom," he said as we sat on my back porch watching fireflies emerge in the twilight, "I need to ask you something." Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me for what happened, for not seeing what Simone was doing sooner? I pulled him into a hug. This man who would always be my little boy, no matter how old he got. There's nothing to forgive, honey. You were deceived by someone who was very good at deception. What matters is that when you saw the truth, you chose to do the right thing even though it cost you your marriage. That took real courage. He hugged me back tightly. I'm going to make this right. Whatever it takes, however long it takes. I'm going to prove that you can trust me again. You already have, I assured him. We sat together in comfortable silence, healing slowly, rebuilding trust that had been damaged but not destroyed. But even as peace settled over my little corner of the world, I knew the legal battle was just beginning. Simone and Jennifer would face trial. There would be testimony and evidence and cross-examination. I'd have to relive the nightmare of being targeted and manipulated. Have to face Simone in court and tell my story to strangers. Detective Brennan prepared me for what was coming. Mrs. Cole, I want you to understand that this is going to be a lengthy process. The defense will likely try to argue that Simone genuinely believed you were experiencing cognitive decline, that her actions were motivated by concern rather than greed. They'll try to paint you as a confused, elderly woman who misunderstood their intentions. Let them try, I said firmly. I have documentation proving my competence. I have medical records, financial records, testimony from friends and community members. I have Simone's own recorded words laying out her plan to institutionalize me and steal my assets. Truth is on my side. That's exactly the attitude you need to have. The detective smiled. Mrs. Cole, you're going to make an excellent witness. Your clarity and documentation are going to be crucial to this case. And it's not just about you anymore. By fighting back, you've helped us uncover a pattern of abuse that victimized multiple elderly people. You've potentially saved others from going through what you experienced. As summer deepened and my garden flourished, I found myself thinking about all the ways this situation could have ended differently. If I'd been just a little less confident in myself, a little more willing to doubt my own perceptions, a little more isolated from friends who knew the truth about my competence. If Marcus hadn't found the courage to question his wife's narrative, if Detective Brennan hadn't taken my case seriously, any one of those factors could have tipped the balance in Simone's favor, could have resulted in me locked in a memory care facility being medicated and managed while my life savings disappeared. But none of those things had happened. I'd fought back and I'd won, not just for myself, but for the other victims who were now coming forward. Emboldened by my example, Patricia stopped by one afternoon with fresh strawberries from her garden. You look different, she observed. More settled, more yourself. I feel different, I admitted. This whole experience has been horrible, but it's also taught me something important. I'm stronger than I thought I was. I'm capable of fighting for myself even when the people who are supposed to love me become adversaries. And I'm not alone even when someone tries to isolate me. Patricia nodded thoughtfully. You know what impresses me most? You never lost sight of who you are. Simone tried to convince you and everyone else that you were incompetent and confused and unable to manage your own life. But you never believed her. You trusted yourself even when it would have been easier to give in. That's real strength, Vivian. As evening approached and Patricia left to make dinner for her own family, I stood in my garden one last time before going inside. The tomatoes needed to be harvested soon. The roses needed deadheading. The herb garden needed weeding. All the ordinary tasks of maintaining a life. Tasks that Simone had tried to claim I was too incompetent to manage. I picked a ripe tomato, still warm from the afternoon sun, and bit into it right there among the plants. The flavor exploded in my mouth, sweet and tart and perfectly balanced. I thought, this is what living feels like. Making your own choices, tending to things that matter, trusting yourself to know what you need. No one was going to take that away from me again. The trial began on a crisp October morning, 6 months after Simone's arrest. I walked into the courthouse wearing my best navy dress, the one I'd bought for Marcus's college graduation, with my hair neatly styled and my late husband's watch on my wrist. I wanted the jury to see me as I truly was, a competent, dignified woman who refused to be reduced to a victim. Simone sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit. Her once perfect appearance diminished by months in jail. She wouldn't look at me as I took my seat in the witness gallery, but I could feel the hatred radiating from her across the courtroom. Jennifer Carroll sat beside her own attorney at a separate table facing similar charges. Their conspiracy had unraveled completely once investigators started pulling threads. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Amanda Chun, had prepared me thoroughly for my testimony. She'd warned me that the defense would try to shake my credibility to suggest I was confused or vindictive or misremembering events. But when I finally took the stand and placed my hand on the Bible, I felt nothing but calm certainty. I knew my truth and I had the evidence to back it up. Amanda walked me through my story methodically. The wellness check that started everything. The forged power of attorney documents. The recorded conversation where Simone laid out her plan to institutionalize me and access my assets. The spreadsheets calculating how quickly they could deplete my savings. Each piece of evidence was entered into the record. Each damning detail exposed to the jury's scrutiny. When the defense attorney cross-examined me, he tried every tactic to undermine my testimony. Isn't it true you sometimes forget things, Mrs. Cole? Don't all people your age experience some cognitive decline? Couldn't you simply be mistaken about what your daughter-in-law intended? I answered each question calmly and precisely, never losing my composure. Yes, I occasionally forget where I put my reading glasses, just like people of all ages do. No, I don't experience cognitive decline beyond normal aging. And no, I'm not mistaken about Simone's intentions when we have her own recorded voice describing her plan to defraud me. Marcus testified next. His voice steady but pained as he described how his wife had manipulated him for months. He presented the laptop. Files, the emails, the text messages that proved the conspiracy. He admitted his own guilt in not questioning things sooner, in being so easily deceived by someone he loved. The jury watched him intently, and I could see sympathy in several faces. Here was a son who'd been caught between loyalty to his wife and love for his mother, who'd ultimately chosen to do the right thing despite the personal cost. The most powerful testimony came from the other victims Jennifer and Simone had targeted. An 82-year-old man whose daughter had used Jennifer's legal services to gain conservatorship, then sold his home and moved him into a substandard facility while pocketing the proceeds. A 75-year-old woman whose nephew had isolated her from friends and convinced authorities she was incompetent, only to be exposed when a neighbor noticed suspicious activity. Each story followed the same pattern. Isolation, false documentation, manipulation of family members, or exploitation of existing family dysfunction, and systematic theft disguised as care planning. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned with guilty verdicts on all counts for both Simone and Jennifer, I felt no triumph, only a quiet relief that justice had been served. Simone was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for fraud, forgery, and elder financial exploitation. Jennifer received 15 years due to her position of trust as an attorney and her role in orchestrating multiple schemes. Both would have to pay substantial restitution to their victims. After the sentencing, Detective Brennan found me in the courthouse hallway. Mrs. Cole, I want you to know that your courage in fighting back and coming forward has had ripples far beyond your own case. We've identified 6 additional victims and opened investigations into at least a dozen more suspicious conservatorship. You've helped protect countless other elderly people from this kind of abuse. I just wanted to protect myself in my home, I told her. I never intended to become some kind of crusader against elder abuse. Sometimes the most important acts of courage are the ones we commit simply to defend our own dignity. She replied, You showed other victims that it's possible to fight back, that they don't have to accept abuse just because it comes from family members or trusted professionals. That's a powerful message. Marcus and I had dinner that evening at my house. The first truly relaxed meal we'd shared since this nightmare began. I made my pot roast, his favorite since childhood, and we ate at the kitchen table where he'd done homework and told me about school dances and first heartbreaks. Mom, I've been thinking about something, he said as I served apple pie for dessert. I want to buy back the furniture that Simone sold. I've tracked down most of the pieces through the restitution investigation. I want to restore your home to the way it was before she tried to take everything from you. That's thoughtful, honey. But honestly, I'm okay with the way things are now. Those pieces held memories, yes, but I've realized something important through all of this. My home isn't defined by furniture or objects. It's defined by the life I choose to live here. By the garden I tend and the friends I welcome and the independence I fought to maintain. You don't need to restore the past. We just need to build a better future. He smiled, and for the first time in months it reached his eyes. Then at least let me help you with the garden this weekend. Those tomatoes are getting out of control, and I know fall planting season is coming up. I like that very much. We spent the following Saturday working side by side in the garden. Our hands in the same soil that had grounded me through the darkest parts of this ordeal. Marcus pruned and weeded while I planned next season's layout. We talked about everything and nothing, rebuilding our relationship one conversation at a time. 3 months after the trial, I received an unexpected invitation. A local advocacy organization that worked on elder rights issues wanted me to speak at their annual conference about my experience fighting financial exploitation. They thought my story could educate families about warning signs and empower other elderly people to advocate for themselves. I almost declined. The thought of standing in front of strangers and reliving my trauma felt overwhelming. But then I remembered the other victims whose testimonies had helped convicts Simone and Jennifer. If sharing my story could help even one person recognize abuse or find the courage to fight back, wasn't that worth the discomfort? The day of the conference, I stood at the podium looking out at 200 faces and told them everything. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the systematic attempt to steal my autonomy and my assets. I told them about the importance of documentation, of trusting yourself when others try to convince you you're incompetent, of seeking help from professionals who specialize in elder law. I told them that being elderly doesn't mean being helpless, that we have rights and resources and the ability to fight back against those who would exploit us. When I finished speaking, the audience rose in a standing ovation that brought tears to my eyes. Afterward, dozens of people approached me with their own stories or questions. Some were elderly individuals facing similar situations. Others were adult children worried about protecting their aging parents. Several were professionals who worked in elder care or law enforcement, thanking me for highlighting an issue that too often remained hidden behind closed doors. One woman in particular stayed after everyone else had left. She was perhaps 70, well-dressed, but with eyes that held a familiar desperation. "My daughter-in-law has been pressuring me to sign over power of attorney," she said quietly. "She says it's just for emergencies, but something feels wrong about it. After hearing your story, I realize she's been using some of the same tactics, the isolation, the suggestions that I'm not managing well on my own, the subtle undermining of my confidence. What should I do?" "Don't sign anything," I told her firmly. "Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Find an elder law attorney immediately and have them review any documents before you sign. Document everything your daughter-in-law says and does. And remember that you have the right to make your own decisions about your life and your assets, regardless of what anyone else thinks you should do." She thanked me with tears in her eyes, and I watched her walk away with her shoulders a little straighter, her step a little more confident. That moment, more than the trial verdict or the prison sentences, felt like true victory. I turned my nightmare into something useful, something that could protect others from experiencing what I'd endured. As winter approached and I prepared my garden for its dormant season, I reflected on how much had changed in 1 year. I discovered depths of strength I hadn't known I possessed. I'd learned that family loyalty must be tempered with honest assessment of people's actions, not blind faith in their intentions. I'd found that being elderly didn't mean being helpless or dependent. That competence and dignity could be maintained regardless of age if you refused to let others define your capabilities. My house stood solid around me, still mine, still filled with memories, but also with new purpose. Marcus visited regularly now, our relationship stronger for having been tested and refined by crisis. We both learned painful lessons about trust and I almost declined. The thought of standing in front of strangers and reliving my trauma felt overwhelming. But then I remembered the other victims whose testimonies had helped convicts Simone and Jennifer. If sharing my story could help even one person recognize abuse or find the courage to fight back, wasn't that worth the discomfort? The day of the conference, I stood at the podium looking out at 200 faces and told them everything. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the systematic attempt to steal my autonomy and my assets. I told them about the importance of documentation, of trusting yourself when others try to convince you you're incompetent, of seeking help from professionals who specialize in elder law. I told them that being elderly doesn't mean being helpless, that we have rights and resources and the ability to fight back against those who would exploit us. When I finished speaking, the audience rose in a standing ovation that brought tears to my eyes. Afterward, dozens of people approached me with their own stories or questions. Some were elderly individuals facing similar situations. Others were adult children worried about protecting their aging parents. Several were professionals who worked in elder care or law enforcement, thanking me for highlighting an issue that too often remained hidden behind closed doors. One woman in particular stayed after everyone else had left. She was perhaps 70, well-dressed, but with eyes that held a familiar desperation. "My daughter-in-law has been pressuring me to sign over power of attorney," she said quietly. "She says it's just for emergencies, but something feels wrong about it." After hearing your story, I realize she's been using some of the same tactics, the isolation, the suggestions that I'm not managing well on my own, the subtle undermining of my confidence. What should I do? Don't sign anything, I told her firmly. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Find an elder law attorney immediately and have them review any documents before you sign. Document everything your daughter-in-law says and does. And remember that you have the right to make your own decisions about your life and your assets, regardless of what anyone else thinks you should do. She thanked me with tears in her eyes, and I watched her walk away with her shoulders a little straighter, her step a little more confident. That moment, more than the trial verdict or the prison sentences, felt like true victory. I turned my nightmare into something useful, something that could protect others from experiencing what I'd endured. As winter approached and I prepared my garden for its dormant season, I reflected on how much had changed in 1 year. I discovered depths of strength I hadn't known I possessed. I'd learned that family loyalty must be tempered with honest assessment of people's actions, not blind faith in their intentions. I'd found that being elderly didn't mean being helpless or dependent. That competence and dignity could be maintained regardless of age if you refused to let others define your capabilities. My house stood solid around me, still mine, still filled with memories, but also with new purpose. Marcus visited regularly now, our relationship stronger for having been tested and refined by crisis. We both learned painful lessons about trust and manipulation, about the importance of questioning narratives that don't align with observed reality. On a Sunday afternoon in early December, I was reading on my porch when Mrs. Chon called over the fence. "Vivian, I just heard from my daughter. She saw you on the news last week, that interview about elder financial abuse. She said you were wonderful, so articulate and strong. I'm proud to be your neighbor." I smiled, waving acknowledgement. "Thank you." It's strange to think that something so terrible could lead to something positive. But if my experience helps others avoid the same trap, then maybe it was worth going through. As evening fell and I prepared dinner in my kitchen, I thought about Simone sitting in a prison cell, her carefully constructed life destroyed by her own greed and cruelty. Part of me felt sorry for her, for the person she might have been if she'd chosen differently. But mostly, I felt grateful that I'd been strong enough to resist her manipulations, brave enough to fight back, and lucky enough to have people in my life who believed in me when it mattered most. The police had knocked on my door for a wellness check because my son reported me missing while I was gardening. That moment had felt like the beginning of the end, like everything I'd built was about to be stripped away. Instead, it had been the beginning of something else entirely. An awakening to my own resilience, a clarification of what truly mattered, a reclamation of my right to live life on my own terms. I was Vivian Cole. I was 68 years old. I was exactly where I belonged and I was free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them.